Good evening. If everybody would take a seat, we'd like to get going, get started here with this little program this evening. All right, good evening. First of all, on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight to participate in this little presentation by the architect of some site layouts and traffic flow patterns and such with the new building program. Before we get started, there's a couple housekeeping things we have to start with, and that would be to call the roll, since this is a scheduled special board meeting. So, Rob, would you please call the roll? All right, with that, I believe we're going to turn it over to Mrs. Savage.
Thank you, Tom. And again, I want to echo what Tom said about welcoming you and thanking you for giving up some of your time this evening to share with us. We want to present to you tonight two different options as far as site layout for the new 6 to 12 building. We want to talk about some of the major concerns that we heard during the levy campaign as far as green space and practice fields and traffic flow for the site. We want to gather input from you, answer as many questions as we have available to us at the time. But we're going to have two different options for you to look at as far as site location for the new 6 to 12 building. We are still currently working on the development of the classrooms and the renovations for the pre-K to 5 building. Those will be coming at a similar meeting to this one later in the summer. But for right now, we're going to start with these two options. And what I'd like to do is just give an overall introduction of where we are in the process. And then we'll turn it over to Craig Beilhartz and Kent Perk, who are here representing Beilhartz Architects and are working with us on this project. So we're also going to put it up here on the big screen. And we'll have these designs available in the hallway, or we'll leave them up here tonight for you to look at as we conclude the meeting as well. So in option A, or scheme A, as we look out at our campus site, you can kind of relative yourself to where the football field is and where the existing pre-K to 5 building is located. The new 6 to 12 building will be located east of the current football field. And in this configuration, you have what we're calling the courtyard concept. This is going to be a 2-story building no matter which scheme we go with. That was something the board decided long before the levy campaign, or while the levy campaign was going. So in this option, the courtyard itself, when you enter the building site from Fountain Grove Drive, this is the parent drop-off. This is only for parent drop-off. Now, it's quite a long ways around the lot because you're going to come in and create a full, almost semicircle of where parents can then stop along any point in the sidewalk to drop off their student to enter the building. The administrative building, the educational space, the media center would all be part of that semicircle. The courtyard in the middle. And then on the west side of that half-circle division, you have your more common areas for the athletics, the music, the cafeteria, and the public spaces. As a visioning team, that's one thing we heard loud and clear, was that we wanted to create that division between the public spaces and the educational spaces. So this kind of accomplishes that. Now, I want to point out at this time as well that one of the things we promised during the levy campaign is that we would look at this site to make sure we were using it best, not only for this project, but also for the future. So there is talk, and the architects are well aware, that there could be a future auditorium that is community driven. There could be a future additional gymnasium. We are losing a gymnasium as far as going from 5 buildings to 2. This has been a big concern for some of our community. So again, we're planning for that in the future. And then also outside, more near the maintenance building in the top right-hand corner, also planning in that area for future development of a transportation center so that we could bring the buses and the bus maintenance out to this site as well. Even with all of those future expansions as a possibility, you'll notice that there's still plenty of green space available for practice fields and other future needs that may exist. The parking lots you see closest to the football field are called bus parking and event parking. Again, when you cooperate and build with the State Department, they are giving you certain limits on what you're able to build. And parking lots are one of those limits per se. So we may in fact need additional parking for our football field, but the only way we can maximize our usage of that area is by combining it with the bus parking. So the bus parking would enter a completely separate entrance off Fountain Grove Drive and go in and out through that way. Traffic flow for the pre-K to 5 building is very similar to what we have now at this point. Traffic can come in off Center Street or around from Fountain Grove Drive, enter here, and park and let students off at any point in the sidewalk in front of the building. Buses would continue to enter here to do the loop. So there would actually be 2 bus drop-off points, 1 for each building with this plan. Now, if we can jump over to scheme A1 or scheme B, thought we were going to go with A1. Oh, man. Okay, in this scheme, you're going to notice that the main difference with the design of the building is the courtyard is gone. Now you have a building that closer resembles the pre-K to 5 building that we currently have, with educational wings around the center of the public spaces, the gymnasium, the music, the media center, the cafeteria auditorium. You still have a separate entrance for parents and students for student drop-off from buses. You still have the same considerable amount of green space available. And we have shown here, and this is one request, the playground that currently exists for our middle school students, which is located where you see this black area, is going to be moved within the traffic flow. So we'll have a separate playground for pre-K and K students than we do for grades 1 through 5. But both areas on either scheme can be incorporated to separate the students age-wise and more appropriate equipment-wise, but also provide for safety within the driveway versus having to cross that road to go to the playground. The new 6 to 12 building, as far as space requirements, classroom sizes, administrative office, auditoria, library, will be built to the state building design manual. So we'll get everything that every other school, if you've been in any other new school building in the state of Ohio, has received. Our locally funded initiatives are going to provide some additional space for art, music, the athletic area, and terrazzo flooring, which is very important for long-term maintenance upkeep in both buildings. Okay, Craig, have I missed anything on the overview?
No, I think.
Have I stolen all of your talk?
No, not at all. I think that was very well done. I think the only thing I can think of on this site that's a little bit different than the other one is that we added a internal drive between the busing area, and we're still kind of looking at the possibility of doing something in the back with buses. So that's still kind of up in the air. We do have a traffic study that we've commissioned and anticipate getting that back any day. That traffic study will help us not only internally in terms of site design, but a big portion of it will have to do with the curb cuts or the areas on Fountain Grove, whether we need decel lanes, or I'm sure we will, or turning lanes, just how big an area that will be. Now, that traffic study does include more than just Fountain Grove. That includes this intersection, the intersection on 15, the existing intersection at Center here, and I believe the intersection at this location as well. So we did a pretty global and broad-based traffic study, which I don't know, I think a lot of times is somewhat limited in schools, but we just felt like with this consolidation, it was very important to get that traffic study to take into consideration the whole campus and the areas around the campus. So they will be looking at things like traffic signal warrants. Not sure if that's the case, or possibly even traffic signal modifications. If there's an existing traffic signal, perhaps it would need to be upgraded and modernized or something like that. So the traffic study, I think, is going to help in terms of once we've picked a size, shape, and orientation of the building, that's really going to help us in terms of getting the site design completed. And really the only thing that I could say that wasn't touched on is this, other than what I just talked about, is this design does have a different configuration for kind of this first curb cut. One of we did get kind of a preliminary look at the traffic study, and there was mention of getting rid of that middle curb cut on the Fountain Grove Drive. So that's still kind of up in the air. The size and shape of the building, I think, is something that we can talk about now in terms of just general areas, and I think I'll have Kent Perk do that. But we are really not going to get into the building, but I think that it's appropriate in terms of the site for everybody to know where kind of the large areas, the public areas are in on the plan. So I'm going to have Kent do that, unless anybody has any questions about site first.
Oh, lots of questions. Okay, what we'd like to do with questions is maybe bring the microphone to you so that we can capture it, and if we can't, then we will just repeat the question. So we may need, Cinder, you may need to help us with running the mic.
Phil down at you.
I'm pretty loud. I had a question. One of the things brought up was a possible walkway between the two schools for older students to get to their younger siblings and then out to Barrister, because there are quite a few kids in Peters Addition that walk. Is there anything in there in that project for that?
This site actually would be most conducive to that, as you could have a sidewalk along this, because it's not going to be open to the public. I mean, as far as automobile traffic, it'll be very tightly regulated in terms of the school. We could put gates. We don't want anything but buses in here anyway, so that would be a very good way to do that.
Is that an option on Scheme A as well?
We can be like a smorgasbord. We can take some meat from A and put it with the potatoes on B, and so on and so forth. So we're just trying to get that feedback and then tie it all together.
Okay.
That would be the same, so if parents had students in both buildings, they wouldn't have to drop off at both buildings. I mean, they could pick up at one location.
We were looking at trying to get some buses back here, and it's somewhat problematic. I mean, you have to have we'd like to bring the buses at a 45-degree angle and have the students get out of the bus on the right side and then leave, rather than have them facing away from the building, so to speak, so that the bus driver can see the children going into the school. And that area is just kind of tight with all the playgrounds and the practice fields and the green spaces. So the jury's really kind of out on whether we can try to do.
But that would address the bus drop-off, but I think he's asking about parent drop-off.
Oh.
So one thing in Carrie's question, you know, if that walkway were available, when the state, again, one of those state regulations is you have to have a separate parent drop-off from busing from student parking. So one drop-off for parents is probably not going to work just because of the orientation of the first building. But what we may have with this walkway, if parents felt comfortable dropping their student off here, the student could walk, depending on, you know, the traffic flow, or parents could drop off here and students could walk up that exit. But my guess is if you're a parent of a pre-K to 5 student, you're going to want to drop off at this building, and then that is a great question, because I think that's one we need to take a look at. If a parent drops off here and exits, we don't want them necessarily coming all the way back around to drop off at the 6 to 12 building. I'm not sure the site's going to let us solve that problem, but good point, and one that we definitely need to think about. There was a question over here.
Yeah, David Brown, I own the land to the right of the site there. And to me, you got to have sidewalks coming to the site. I mean, you've got residential neighborhoods. There's going to be more there. There's going to be some across the street. There should be sidewalks along Fountain Drive. And there should be sidewalks going into Greystone to connect the whole site. I mean, they're making me put sidewalks in. Well, what for? Put them in the school site too and get them to my sidewalks.
We will on our site. We will have sidewalks on our site. Whether or not they connect here or here or here, if that'll be something we'd have to talk about with the city and what their plans are for the sidewalks up to the site.
Another question.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I have to cut across the 1275, which isn't on your diagram, but 1275 would exit to the lower left, go around the lower area to the lower left, that's the lower right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
1275 is the road that goes
right.
over to County
Right in
Road.
here?
Yeah, and it goes southwest over to the State Route 2. Well, you're going to get kids taking that route as they leave the school because it's a shortcut if they're going southwest or west. So I think that should be addressed if possible now, because once the school's done, once it's set, you're going to have a heck of a time getting it addressed.
Yeah,
And
that was another one of the corners that they had cars sitting and counting cars and looking at traffic flow at that.
2 and 1275? State Route 2 and 1275?
No, not that far out.
See, that road is terrible. If you drive that, it's worse than Fountain Grove Drive.
Yeah, not that far out, I don't believe.
And it's curvy, and there's a bridge down there.
Yeah. Okay, we'll let Kent talk a little bit more about the public areas. Do you want that back?
Bob, you have a question?
Oh, another question.
I don't know, Mike. Talking about the flow of traffic, is everything flowing one way, or is it gonna be both ways, like on the mains going to the other school?
We want to try, like where we have the parents coming in as the cars to drop off students, we want to try to keep that one way as much as we can, because we have to have that car coming in and then making a left-hand turn so that the student ends up on the curb side of the vehicle, and then they exit the vehicle onto the curb. That provides a layer of protection for the student so a car doesn't jump over the car would have to jump over the curb to have an accident. So, and then we want to have the vehicle exit the property as soon as possible So it's a kind of a catch-22. So we, as designers internally, we would say, okay, we want a curb cut so that they just go back out on Fountain Grove. And then the traffic engineer comes in and says, okay, now you have people opposing one another in curb cuts. One, exiting and people driving down the street. So if you don't have the one way and then back out the same curb cut, you have people coming at each other and interfering with each other from the same property. So it's kind of a tough thing because we're all creatures of the most simple way of dealing with things. So we don't want to drop a student off and then backtrack completely the way we came and then back out onto Fountain Grove. But if that's the safest and best way, then that's what we'll do. So.
In that way, to address the earlier question about parent or students at each building, if we could get parents to drop off at this building first and then exit to the right and then drop off at the pre-K to 5 and then exit going out, that would be at least the most simple route. But like Craig said, we're creatures of habit, and sometimes those habits aren't necessarily the most simple.
Hi, Tom Voigt, a sports fan. Those fields out there, they look like football or soccer fields. The baseball and softball fields are all on city-owned property. Are there any intentions of having any softball or baseball fields that the school actually owns or on their property?
I would say at this time in the design, you do see what is equivalent to a football field because that was easy as a point of measurement. Those will not be developed as all football fields or soccer fields. Those will be left as green space for future development. We have not talked about softball or baseball being brought onto the property. I don't foresee that in the near future, given that we have such incredible facilities that are also maintained by our city at this point on other property. I don't see us doubling that, but I could be wrong. Again, that's why the board is here tonight, to listen to these questions and suggestions and move forward. Yes?
In that Plan B, are students allowed to enter into their parking area through Barrister Drive?
Let's pull that up real quick. So as Craig mentioned, this is one thing I learned from the first few meetings that we've had, because I had that question as well, as if Barrister could be open to traffic flow for one of the groups. And what I was told is if, in fact, we open Barrister up, you create that log jam once again of you have traffic coming in from two different directions and having to turn and create turns. Now, unless you had a traffic light within that or some way to regulate that, it may not be the best option for drop-off or pickup times, but could be an option if Barrister were in fact open as for special events. It may just not serve the purpose during drop-off and pickup. Yep.
I have a couple things. One on Scheme B, you have that bus cut through there, but not on Scheme A. I guess what's driving the need for that, or not?
For the cut through from Barrister, or
from
in the middle?
Yes.
That was the question that went back to the
Okay.
first question about students being able to travel back and forth between buildings.
Okay. So you could potentially put that in Scheme
Yes.
A then?
Yeah.
Right. I guess in looking at two different schemes, it looks like in Scheme A, it gives the cars more area to be off the road during the drop-off. And it looks like the students will be nice and close to the building on that side. Yes.
With this design,
Yes.
yep.
I guess my main concern would be that the buses seem awful far from the building. So during inclement weather, it seems like the students have a long ways to go on the outside of the building.
We had a lot of different site plans, and I'll be honest with you, we haven't moved that parking lot over yet.
So we could. He's saying we could move this parking lot a little closer to the buildings.
Okay,
If
and then,
needed.
and there's an efficient way then for the students to enter the building and pass through? Okay, and then,
And we could, excuse me, but we could even on that scheme there, we could even rotate the building 45 degrees or maybe a full 90. So the classrooms and the administration area faces Fountain Grove Drive.
One of the
Probably look
things that
nicer.
we are struggling with as well is, do we have split administrative offices, or do we have them together and then have the middle school entrance on one side of the office and the high school on the other? And we actually had a scheme where we had the offices show, on the scheme A, we had split offices.
Yeah, an earlier version of this plan, we actually had a middle school administration area here with a middle school entrance from the north, and then a high school administration here on the south with a high school entrance.
And what we found is that we have a lot of ideas about the building, and we can't design 4 buildings, and so we want to try to hopefully get feedback on the site, because it'll really help us in terms of the building.
Dave Perkins, I served on the committee that took a look at educational needs. And one thing that I'm hearing is concerning me a little bit. I don't think that we should have traffic patterns define what the building is going to look like or how the building is going to be. We have to consider the fact that this facility needs to be flexible, it needs to be capable of doing all sorts of different types of educational processes. And that's the primary thing. I think that we can make flow of traffic work, but let's not make a decision solely on what's the easiest way to get a car in and out of the area.
Well, Dave, let me address that one first, and then you can follow up. But Dave, I totally agree with you, and there are 2 processes at work right now going on simultaneously. All of those visioning and things we talked about 21st century learning and the educational needs of this district are being addressed through the other design process that's going on within these walls. Either of these schemes will address those needs and be flexible. But what's important to us, as Craig just said, we can't keep saying, well, let's design it one more time. We need to kind of, because traffic was such an important item to the community, we felt it was important to also take into consideration those needs. But I can assure you at the next meeting, when you see the layout and the design of the educational spaces, that you're going to see that those visioning items are definitely highlighted. You want to follow?
The only thing I would say is that it's more than 2 for us, it's maybe 6.
Yeah.
So we have a lot going on, and we just need some feedback.
Okay.
I'm just curious I'm Dean Spangler. I'm just curious, the buildings, I know it's just in a general concept now, but how big of a footprint is that or I mean, how many square feet are we talking
Kent, do you want to?
in rough terms?
The building's 100, go ahead.
Yeah, the state program, the building area, I believe, is 148,000, few odd square feet in there, but we're under 150,000 square feet is the total budget.
And the footprint is significant. Well, that footprint is probably close to 150,000 square feet because of the courtyard. You know, now the other one may be a little less because it doesn't have a courtyard, and you know, you have single-story spaces in a building, and then you have 2-story spaces in a building, so you can't just say it's 148,000 square feet.
What's the old school? The middle school, how many feet is that?
118.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go back to the question about drop-off and pickup of students at each building. You know, there's also high school kids that pick up their siblings. You know, is there any way at least to take away from this meeting, a way to possibly run something, I guess it'd be to the west of the new school, around the football field, or create some sort of traffic pattern where you have a right-hand drop-off, obviously, because otherwise you're gonna have traffic in and out of streets all over the place, jumping around. And I don't know what our percentage is of mixed high school and elementary school students. You know, that number would probably help. But I would think that would need to be some sort of a priority as you go forward on the site plan. Normally, and I'll just say this, and we'll go down that road, no pun intended, but we'll go down that path. Normally, it's not a good idea to have internal traffic with vehicles on school-owned property, not even for adults, let alone students. So I think that's something that we would really have to look at very, very closely, and study that.
Follow that up with, if you're showing the town to somebody and you're driving by, and you say you're not to drive in, where's the front of the building face? Is it face toward those woods out there?
Well, like Kent said,
It doesn't face the county road.
It could.
what Kent's saying is that we have one that does and the other one that probably will.
Okay, so if it,
Like,
you could drive by the county road and see the front of the building.
you'll see the front of the building.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we had,
Kinda hard to see that, where the front is.
well, I know, and I wish we could do everything at once, but
Yes, another question.
Right along the same lines, with cost of ownership, when you twist a building 90 degrees, you have a whole different solar load on there. So when we look at the long-term cost of ownership, which one costs less to cool and heat and all of that? You have quite a solar load, it looks like on Plan B versus Plan A would be less expensive to own, I think.
the ideal for daylighting, the ideal orientation is to have an east-west or axis for a quarter, so you have north-south light coming into the rooms. If we do that, we did look at a scheme that did that, and it was a longer vertical scheme that was very focused on the solar orientation and the daylighting, and it consumed a lot of property. This scheme is more centrally or radially organized in terms of radial organization. The other one is kind of long and narrow, I think fits more appropriately to the front and Fountain Grove. We are doing energy modeling. Right now, we're doing Energy Star, and then we're doing parametric modeling, and then we'll actually have a full-blown energy model once we get a building, and that will have an impact on how we do
Won't the direction that it faces have a
Yes,
significant impact
yes.
on that?
more on the academics and things like that, where we have a lot of glazing.
Question.
I'm sure you've already thought of this too, but the middle school teacher parking lot, has that been increased in size? Because you're going to have more teachers right there, yeah.
This is currently shown just as existing in this model. There is staff parking for the 6 to 12 building. There's a specified staff parking area. This would have to be looked at. Again, it would be built up to the state mandate of what they tell us we can have. It may or may not be included in that renovation cost. We may put more money in educationally. But right now, we have not counted nor addressed, because we also have staff parking out here in this
Okay.
lot, which is unlimited. Question over here. Okay.
We shuttle the kids now, or are we still, how are we gonna handle like the kids over in Lincoln to come over to Mayville?
as we talked about in the levy campaign, the shuttle stops are probably going to go away because the buildings are going to go away. But what we envision is we'll still have a route where students are picked up at a designated stop along the east side of town or the northeast side of town. So the shuttle buses per se will go away and be replaced with buses that are actually stopping in those neighborhoods to pick up the students. And we'll have centralized locations like we do now with some of our other stops.
With the design that has the courtyard, is the idea that that courtyard would be a functional space for students even during the day in terms of lunch or instructional space or pathways between building, or that it would be relatively closed off for security reasons? I guess, is it going to be functional or not?
Again, if we choose to go with the courtyard option, that was one thing that the visioning team also talked about, outdoor educational areas and making it a place where students can learn. So that would be our intent. Same thing could be accomplished in the second plan. You just wouldn't have a centralized location for that outdoor education planning center. You might have a little bit longer walk to get to that area. But yes, educationally, that is a 21st century thinking that you should be using your outdoor space as well as your indoor space for educational purposes.
And I'll try to get us back on track, I guess, a little bit too, because one of the big goals that our firm has today is to get your input on whether or not you like a courtyard plan or a more traditional plan where you maybe have bookend academic areas, the middle school on one side, the high school on the other. And the building may not look like either one of the buildings, but it's a starting point. We want to know, is a courtyard something that is just not a tasteful thing that you want to look at? I think it could be something very nice for education in terms of outdoor learning. But I think that's the main focus for us, so that we can take that next step and look at the energy modeling and get the buildings sited properly and get everything working together in terms of traffic flow, building juxtaposition of public spaces and educational spaces and administrative offices and music and everything. So some of the things, and Ken will talk about it here in a little bit, kind of just point out where some of those spaces are on each one, and you can kind of see where they are relative to the field house, relative to the pre-K-5 building, or Fountain Grove.
I think he's getting ready to do that. So let's steal his microphone for him.
Oh, yeah, Anita Brandeberry. I just had a concern about the courtyard concept, that for efficiency of movement during a day, to get people from one point to another, I feel as if the courtyard breaks up that movement and it causes people to have a waste of time in getting around.
Well, let's take a look at that, because as they've blown up, and we'll transition into Kent talking about it, you know, when you look at traffic flow, and keep in mind this is going to be a 2-story building, so when I look at this design, my educational spaces, what's currently labeled as classrooms, have equal access to the media center and the admin area, have somewhat equal access to the public spaces because I'm just going right to where I need, and provides that separation that we talked about for some of the age levels of the students. 6th graders could be located in a different area of that educational wing than 12th graders. So to me, traffic flow in this concept maybe is a little smoother than in the second one. But Kent, why don't you go ahead and point out the different areas that are going to be included?
Sure. Actually, when you compare the two plans, if you're looking at someone moving from, let's say, this classroom up to a room over here, this distance in this plan, Scheme A, is much shorter than if you compare Scheme B from one end to the other, really substantially shorter. But I think that the building could be, and this is something we have to work with the district on, is how this building would be separated, or where the grade levels would be located. I know that was an important thing that the community, they didn't want necessarily the sixth graders mixing with the seniors. And so whether or not, and this area here would be the two-story area. So whether we end up with a two-story lower grade, two-story upper grade, or maybe all one floor is lower grades, the upper floors are the higher grades. It just depends. But I think with this type of layout, and maybe the center area, we're not seeing the second floor, but the center area on the second floor could possibly be some of those shared spaces, some of those extra, or those life skills, art, some of those courses that are shared by both groups. So, is a student who's in this room ever going to need to go up there in a day? Probably not. Not if the building is designed like it should be, where we keep those separations in ages. And back to the courtyard. This courtyard's kind of got an undulating shape going to it, but it's roughly about 150 by 100 feet. So what would that be, about 4 basketball courts, if you laid 4 courts next to each other. So it's not exceptionally huge, but yeah, we would definitely want to utilize this space as multi-purpose with some outdoor learning areas. Even in this area here, the auditoria, which is the new state term, or it's been around for us for quite some time, but it's the state's term for a combination auditorium cafeteria. Student dining, here's the possibility of maybe having some outdoor dining area that you could utilize that, and then have classroom learning areas down in here. There's just all sorts of possibilities that you could do with a courtyard.
Yeah, can we look at the other one? And blow it up as well? Yeah.
Now, another one of the differences
Go to
in
the
the
right and down.
academic spaces is Scheme A had call them a classroom pod, but there were 2 on the first floor, and there would be 2 on the second floor. This scheme has smaller academic areas, but there would be more of them. There's benefits to that, and there's also some downsides to that type of idea. But it would really be the same thing, where we'd have to work with the district on where the grades would be positioned. This pod down here, you see, is quite a distance away from this area. So the question is, what grade levels are down there? And there again, the spaces like life skills and things would be in this area on the second floor. One of the options that we are also looking at is possibly creating one of these academic pods where all those activities would be, rather than having them kind of between things, where there would be a wing where some of those courses would be located.
Okay, what additional questions do those 2 views bring up? Emily?
Can you just talk a little bit about generally the pros and cons about having a courtyard versus not having a courtyard? I mean, as far as, obviously, like I said, some interesting spaces for outdoor activities and things like that. What would be the cons of having the courtyard? I mean, is it cost? Is it construction cost?
Well, one benefit in Scheme A is the fact that the building has a much smaller overall footprint. It takes up much less area on the site. That's a positive. Another positive, someone mentioned the security. if you're going to have outdoor classroom space, if you can have that contained within a secure courtyard, that's a much better situation than, you know, if, I guess on scheme B, just creating an outdoor classroom space that, you know, is accessible to the parking lot.
Are there any other, Craig, are you aware of any other cons?
I guess, you know, there's you know, we've seen courtyards in buildings. I think somebody pointed out in the administrative team that high school has a courtyard now. It's not very.
It's not very large.
Not very large, not very neat or useful. You know, I think with outdoor learning and 21st century education, Wi-Fi, you know, kind of the college campuses are all, you're always connected, or you have connectivity, and one-to-one devices and different things like that. I think learning can take place in areas that are very beneficial to students and to promote engagement into projects and project-based learning. Certainly, if you have a student in a nice interior courtyard where you can control, you can see them, it's something that I think if you do and you buy into it, it can be a very, very nice feature, something that can certainly enhance education.
Is there a significant difference in the cost of construction or maintenance with or without?
I mean, that's something I think we would work with our construction manager at risk on. Once we do get a direction, is we would start looking at exterior envelope. You know, does one plan have a significantly larger exterior envelope than the other? Does one have a bigger roof? We talked about the orientation and how they would work in terms of getting daylighting and energy efficiencies that way. So I think, you know, I think that unless, I guess, if we say we can't make a decision academically, or we can't make a decision educationally, or we can't make a decision due to the site, and we have to have that decision being made on how much the building costs, then we'll do it. I would hope that wouldn't be the case. I would hope that we would be making the decision based on what's best in terms of fitting your educational program. And if one costs $75,000 more than the other, I think we're charged with the responsibility with the construction manager at risk to find the $75,000 in this big building project and get you what you want. To do what you want.
Okay.
Yep.
I guess I have a question. Again, you're talking about the courtyard and things like that. What you're saying is, if you have a courtyard, the way the plan is set up now, you have, appears to be adequate classrooms.
Yes.
With the courtyard, okay? Now you take the courtyard away, you said that now what we can do is we can have more classrooms, smaller sizes. So I guess I'm a little confused about
No,
if you have adequate.
not more classrooms.
I thought that's what you said.
He said more suites. We reduced the suite.
Yeah, I was talking about the size of these
Educational
classroom
wings.
suites. These are smaller than the ones that were on Scheme A, because we have a total of 6 of them versus 4. So they're just smaller in size.
But the same number of classrooms in each configuration.
Right. Well, we're not. Yeah, the number of classrooms and the size of classrooms would not change.
Okay. There was a question. Dean had a question.
Just a comment. As for the courtyards, rather than speculating about it, there's been so many schools built in Ohio. Obviously, courtyards have been built. You ought to go talk to those people that had courtyards for 2 to 3, 5 years and say, how's it working out for you? Do you use it? Before you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Some people have chosen to build them, and some people have chosen not to. And I think it comes down to, as Dave mentioned earlier, you know, our educational vision. And if the expectation was set that we were moving in that direction, we would want to see them used. And certainly we could talk to Hicksville has a courtyard, and there are schools around the area that have them versus don't have them. But I think because of how your education is driven, gives you that answer. So, and I think that we could be a little different, or at least we want to establish ourselves as being a little different than maybe what they're using it for. Yeah, Kurt.
I thought on this scheme you said you had 2 administration buildings or 2 administrative offices on.
On one.
No, on an earlier version of this plan.
We were addressing the question, where's the front of the building?
Right.
And we had split offices and then.
There's only one on either scheme, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
We would want them together.
The other thing is, here you got the music next to the auditorium. Go back to your other scheme, you got the music right across from the media center. Probably not a great idea. Because I know that you told me that the music rooms are all soundproof, but if you've ever been in the building,
it's
when
there.
like the band splits up and starts playing, they're playing in the auditorium or the cafeteria. They'll be playing right across from the media center then.
There's a hallway. There's a hallway between them.
Oh, yeah, they'll be. I'm just telling you, that's what I've seen in middle school before.
But again, that's what we are, creatures of habit, because that's what we've been forced to do given the facility we currently have. That necessarily won't be the case in the new building. Could be, unless we change our patterns a little bit.
I will say that 50 years ago, acoustics wasn't something that was paid very close attention to. In high schools. In high schools.
I'm not talking about the rooms. I'm talking about how teachers manage their kids and put them out in the hallway or put them in the cafeteria because they're splitting them up because they're doing solo and ensemble.
Right. There are rooms in that music area. Again, we haven't shown, and we're not ready to show tonight, the individual breakdown, but there are large rehearsal areas and small rooms for solo and ensemble practice, which we don't have in our current facility. So.
That space that says music is what, 6,000, 7,000?
Yeah.
Probably
Yeah, 6,000 to
7,000.
7,000 square feet.
So I mean, it has choir, instrumental, practice rooms, the whole thing. I mean, each one of these, once you kind of design a building, the size, shape, orientation of the building, and then we have like maybe 10 little individual design projects. We have to go design the media center, we have to design the music facility, the kitchen, the art rooms, the life skills rooms, we have to design the administrative offices, the
Special education area.
And we have meetings with all those people to kind of really zero in on making their area work.
Well, I hope you don't discount that comment just out of hand. I mean, that's from somebody that's 30 years in the business. So, I mean, you can explain it all you want. I mean, I think that's very valid.
No, that's fine. Okay. We need to get some direction, and we will definitely listen to the fact that the music room shouldn't be located next to the media center.
Yes, Corey.
Does the admin on each model include all the other different positions?
Yes.
Such as guidance, PT, OT,
Yes.
like all the other people that come in, are there office areas
Yes.
for everybody?
Again, as Craig just said, that space that's being shown is a huge space.
Okay.
We will be designing at the next step with those people to make sure that we have, but I will tell you, the state doesn't necessarily build for OT, PT, speech, counselors, all the areas. So we'll create our wish list. We'll see what the state gives us, and we'll do our best to make it work with what we have.
And do you want to have one site?
We want to have one office, just like in the pre-K to 5 building, there will be one office area, yes. Yeah, Mike.
I noticed in both your drawings, there's one gym, and I'm sure that the state's saying that, but you're moving 3 grades in there. How much bigger is that gym than our high school gym?
It's the same size of our current high school gym.
You're adding 3 grades and having phys ed classes for.
Yeah, which is, again, why you see that little dotted line with the future needs. The state does not recognize, based on what our population is, the needs that we currently have, and unfortunately, really don't put much merit into how full we keep our gymnasiums at this time. So we'll still have the lower gymnasium at the middle school. We'll still have the upper gymnasium at the middle school. And this, I believe, Kent has 3 courts. Is that correct, Kent?
Yeah, one of the main differences, I guess, is with the current setup of the high school with having the balconies. This doesn't, and when you close both sides of the bleachers, you have 3 practice courts. So you actually have you're gaining a court from what you have right now in the high school.
Yes.
Does that mean when it comes down to athletics and you're scheduling volleyball and basketball, that both the junior high and high school level matches have to be coordinated against one facility?
Scheduling will have to be something that is very closely looked at, yes. We may still have to have competition for the middle school in the current middle school gymnasium and leave the high school gymnasium for varsity freshman JV competition levels.
And then so in this one where there's a separate middle school and high school versus with the other one where it seemed to be a little more centralized, just a couple of, I think with teachers who might go between grade levels, or even with students who are taking language at the 8th grade level where they maybe go up with the high school, that the other layout is a little more conducive to movement for staff and students in the cases that that would have to happen. So just a comment.
Yes.
Back to the courtyard, what is the ground cover? Is it concrete or grass or a combination of both?
I think that an outdoor educational space, there are state building design manuals on how those are addressed. I think it's a combination of areas for things to grow. I think it's a combination of landscaping. It's a combination of some patio areas per se. Am I close or?
Yeah, you're right on it. I wouldn't recommend that we plant any grass in there. We don't need lawnmowers in the courtyard. So yes, there would be landscaping. There would be areas for students to gather around, whether they're sitting on benches or boulders or whatever. I mean, a lot of patio and things like that. We did do a courtyard at Lipsick High School. It is not entirely enclosed. It actually is open on the first floor. But that area was it was all landscaped. And then areas for students to gather in small groups.
I think that if we go with this concept, we will definitely work with people that are involved in curriculum, and we will design outdoor educational space. We're not going to have the courtyard be that leftover place in the middle by any means. I think it's something that, we talked in the visioning sessions about collaboration and interaction between staff and how different spaces would be used. And outdoor learning spaces were a very important part of that in terms of having access to technology, not necessarily having to drag books everywhere and sit in front of a chalkboard and be lectured to. So I think that it could be something, and it will be something very nice for learning if we end up with a courtyard. And if we don't, then we will try to focus on providing very nice learning spaces outdoors in that other option.
About how many square feet is that then?
I think he said earlier, the one we currently have or the one in, I think he said 4 basketball courts approximately.
Yeah.
Is that controlled by the state? Like, is that the max right now? Can we go down to a certain size or?
I mean, a lot of it's going to, once we do get into really refining the building and defining those areas, I mean, it'll take shape, and it's probably about the size of half a football field. 100 by 150. So I mean, it's not insignificant. It's not this buildings that have kind of a covered area where students aren't sitting in the hot sun. They have shade and they're pleasant places to be. I mean, that's the last thing that we want to do is provide something that is not desirable to go to.
Okay. Yes, David.
I guess just giving some feedback on design. I like the idea of the courtyard. One, I think it offers a lot of flexibility educationally. I think that you can do a lot of things. Plus, it offers an opportunity, possibly through the auditoria, for students to be able to get outside a little bit during the course of the day, and that's going to create a different attitude for the students and staff, for that matter, that are able to use those. Another thing that I like about that design is it creates a greater separation between the public spaces and the educational spaces, which are going to offer up greater security, and also in the case, heaven forbid, we'd ever have a predator in the building, be able to isolate areas so that the ALICE training and everything can kick in and be able to evacuate the building each Sunday.
Thank you.
Yeah, down here, sir, and then we'll get to you.
From a security standpoint, it looks like there's fewer entry and exits to be concerned about as far as the time when students come in and out on this scheme versus scheme B.
Yeah, this definitely brings, I would say, the focus, unlike before when we were talking about having kind of a middle school remote, completely 180 degrees remote from the high school entrance. We're going to have one common area where the students are dropped off and picked up, and then we're going to have an event entrance kind of between the football field and the basketball place. So yes, during the school day, it reduces that down a lot from the traditional kind of spread out bookend school with a long corridor between and the public spaces in the back. There's, like Kent had said, it makes the building a lot longer. When you have longer buildings, you have egress travel distances that we have to maintain for code reasons. And I think every 250 feet, we have to have a way for the people to get out of the building based on occupancy. So I think that this is a more compact building from that point of view. And again, the courtyard may end up being the shape or it may not be.
Okay, question over here.
Yes, in this climate, aren't you gonna have 2 to 3 months where you have little to no opportunity to use that space?
More than that.
Yep, that's true. True, outdoor education is probably not going to be used in the winter as much, although it could be, depending on the temperature. We have students at the elementary level, based on temperature, that still utilize the playgrounds outside for most of the year, unless it's inclement weather. So again, depending on the total picture of how the weather looks for that day, we might be measuring snowfall or incorporating the winter months into the lessons. Yes?
Just some more feedback again. I have to agree with him. We have a shorter classroom matriculation in this plan today. We pick up extra learning square footage at a very, very low cost with the courtroom here. It's much more appealing. We look at that when we try to attract talent to move to Bryan, and they look at this, nothing personal, we look at the old school, and it's harder to get people here. So either one's going to be better, but this is a lot more modern. But I think ultimately, you're involved in schools all the time, all over the place, and you do this for a living. Are you going to give us your opinion when you're done surveying?
We like this plan. I think, we talk about integration of, STEAM and STEM in different educational issues. And when you have integration, you don't want to maybe go 600 feet down the hall to get an 8th grade person to go to a 9th grade. It seems like anymore, everybody's getting moved up. The seniors are going to the community colleges and getting college credit for their classes. The freshmen are moving up to, or the 8th graders are moving up to freshman math classes and different things like that. So integration or teacher certificates and different things like that, I think, and that's one of the things that we talked about envisioning was kind of breaking down those traditional barriers a little bit and having staff more accessible to one another, having art more accessible to every classroom instead of just going to the art room or something like that. Maybe integrating an art project into a social studies project or something that in terms of a project-based learning setting. So we think kind of a tighter design, a little bit maybe more efficient design than the traditional long corridor between the two bookend schools is something that we like. We still do like it. We felt like we needed to offer more than what we like.
Yes.
What's the area between the lower classrooms and the gym?
That is, if I have to estimate again, that's a public space overflow for like your concession areas or those types of spaces. It could be used for educational learning spaces during the day, but again, I'm going to refer to Kent to make sure that I'm explaining that kind of just off-white color area right outside the gymnasium.
I'm gonna grab my cheat sheet when I can see a little better. That's a mechanical room.
Oh.
It doesn't have to be. I mean, we have to kind of budget when we do these plans. We kind of have to budget all those
No, down
areas
here.
too. No one likes to hear about mechanical rooms. I know Bob in the back. He
Yeah.
likes to
No,
hear about that
Kent,
space.
You've
But
got the mechanical room over here, this right here, right outside, right there.
Yeah.
Oh, that whole area. That whole area is mechanical?
no,
or-
no, just this room here. We've
Oh, okay.
got a couple restrooms, and I think this
And
was
lobby?
a concession lobby. Well, state calls it lobby services, but it's a concession area. The one thing to remember, and another benefit of what this plan shows above what you currently have in the high school, and that is what you currently have is a very small lobby. Come halftime at a basketball game, I know it's tight out there, so it is nice to have a little free-flowing area where people can gather, take a break from the bleacher.
Carrie. The art department is on the second floor above the media or admin. It's in that centralized location. The art, the work and family life, the business areas, the areas that could be shared by all of the grade levels. Yes.
Craig, can I ask a question? If, we have these things for future auditorium, future gym on both sites, one of the things is if we have to do, let's say we get the building up and for whatever reason in the future we decide to add on to it, or is one of these site plans more conducive to expansion or change in the future than the other?
I don't know that one would be really that much better than the other. I really don't. I think that we can work them in. I will tell you the music room is not by the media center. We wouldn't have wanted that anyway. We probably should have flipped the kitchen and the music room on the other plan. We've drawn a lot of plans, and we want to zero in on a good plan, and we'll come back here and we'll present good reasons for having things in good spots, and take your criticism very well and make changes that you want. But I don't, right now, I think that in terms of when we get into refining a plan, we'll be able to get that done maybe more appropriately than a dashed line.
But as along the lines of a classroom expansion, you know, the main thing is, and we could do that at this point. We could take a look at and maybe plan for some future classroom expansion. I guess the thing that to remember along those lines is to, number one, allow for that. So if the time comes that you need that expansion, you're not faced with completely redesigning that traffic flow now, because you've had to put in an addition where you had a parking lot. So, yeah, I think we could take either one of these plans and look at some locations and maybe show those in the next edition where you can see that.
All right, well, we may have a few more questions. Some of you may want to get a closer view of the actual poster layouts, so we're going to stick around. Board members will stay. What I will be doing tomorrow, I will be providing the Bryan Times with an electronic link on an internet survey site with some survey questions so that you can go in and provide some answers based on tonight's comments and questions. And then also, I know that Don Allison planned on running some pictures of these two sites. So if there were people that were not able to be here and they have questions, we encourage you to ask me, we encourage you to ask the board, but we'll open it up for some feedback as well starting tomorrow. And then ultimately the board will be making the final decision and recommendation to Craig fairly quickly based on your comments and your feedback tonight, because as Craig said, we need to get moving on refining this design, providing more detail to this design so that we can have another meeting like this with maybe even more community members when we're looking at actual classrooms and office layouts and media center pictures and getting to more of the exciting part of it. So again, I want to thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate your time and your questions and your comments, and we'll stick around in case you have others. So thank you very much. Tom, do you need to adjourn the meeting?
Okay, thank you very much for coming.